The title of my talk is Love Will Always Find a Way. And that's especially true uh, when you are dating. I met my wife because love always finds a way. And so I lived in Kelowna and I would have to drive through the Rogers Pass to Golden in the middle of winter whenever I got done my work for the week and I was running my own business. So double jeopardy. I had to be able to get back to work on time for the next week because nobody else could cover for me. And yet here we are dating in the middle of winter, and the Rogers Pass sometimes gets a lot of snow and they close the road. So this one night after work, I'm heading off to visit my sweetheart in Golden. And I come up to this divided highway section out of Kelowna, and the snowplow driver, who is in the right lane, decides he's going to cut across and cut me off at the divider on the highway. Very dangerous move. But some people, when they get power, that's exactly what they do. They cause injury to other people. Not because they care, but because they think that having power gives them the right to do whatever they want. And so this one morning, I'm heading up there. The snowplow driver cuts me off, and I'm driving well within the limits of the traction that I have available. I have new winter tires, and they're studded. And yet, because of this dangerous snowplow driver cutting me off, I now have to swerve into the oncoming lane, and there's no traffic at that time of the morning. And I know further up ahead I can cut back onto the correct side of the highway. So I steer to go over there, and the car starts sliding because he didn't give me any warning that he was going to run me into the median. And this, I believe, was deliberate because even snowplow drivers can't change lanes unless it's safe. But he didn't care. So I hit the median, dented the oil pan, which I didn't know about until I examined it later. And I was able to get onto the oncoming side of the traffic and then get past this dangerous driver, get back onto the right side of the road, and the rest of the drive was normal. I had one time that they were thinking about closing the Rogers Pass, and there was a couple of feet of snow on the road in Kelowna. So I knew the drive was going to be pretty tricky. But I had new tires and I knew how to drive in the wintertime, something that a lot of people fail at repeatedly. Not because they're bad drivers, but because they simply don't know. You can't exceed the amount of traction you have in the winter. Every time you do, you're going to get yourself into serious trouble, sliding off the road and getting stuck and that sort of thing. So you have to remain within the limits of the traction that is available. That means you have to trade off in certain situations to remain on the road. So that morning, when they were thinking about closing the Rogers Pass, I got through safely from Kelowna all the way to Golden. No problem. A lot of drivers didn't make it that night. A lot of vehicles slid off the road and were abandoned. What made the difference? One was having new winter tires, studded tires. The other was knowing how to drive when you don't have much traction available. In order to drive that stretch between Revelstoke and Golden and get there while I still had gas in the car, I had to get up to highway speeds. In order to do it in a reasonable amount of time, but going faster creates traction issues. It's particularly severe when you're using the motor to drive the car through deep snow and you come up to a corner. Now you're asking the tires to produce more traction than what you need just going straight down the highway. And this is where a lot of people run into problems. They think they can just steer and things are going to be jolly and they're going to get through. But a lot of people didn't. So what I did, every time I came up to a sharp corner on the highway, I would pop the car into neutral. I would allow it to slow down. When I got to the corner, I would be down to maybe 60 kilometers an hour or so. And then once I got around the corner, I would put the car back into gear on the straight stretch and I would accelerate back up to highway speed. And it's the things that we don't know that really get us into trouble. Not realizing you can't exceed the amount of traction you have. It's just not going to happen. Once you exceed it, you lose traction. And so, on that drive from Rogers Pass to Golden, out in the middle of nowhere, where there's not going to be any help until you get to the Rogers Pass, that was a really steep climb going out of there in the winter, and it's very sharp too. But I made it all the way safely through because I knew how to manage the amount of traction that I could use. Every corner, pop it in neutral, let the car slow down, use all the traction I had available to keep the car on the road going around the corner. Once I got around the corner on the straight stretch, then I could slowly get back up to highway speed again, as long as I wasn't turning. And that got me through that situation where a lot of drivers didn't. So this story is about love will always find a way, and it always does. However, it means sometimes that we got to understand our limits and stay within those limits. Sometimes we got to learn a new way of doing things, a safer way of doing things. And that little trick kept me safe driving back and forth from Kelowna to Golden all winter. It's true. Love will always find a way. Thank you.